Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm doing a follow-up to a video I did a few weeks ago. So I did that video where I looked at what Goodreads said were the worst books that I had ever read, and I'll leave that linked in the cards above. And so today I'm going to talk about the best books that I have ever read according to Goodreads and whether I agree with them or not. Now, caveats as I made in the last video, I don't use Goodreads, I use Storygraph. I had to import all of my data from Storygraph in order to make this video because you cannot sort things by other people's ratings in Storygraph, so it makes this difficult. However, when I did that, it didn't differentiate between my red and my DNFs. My DNFs have been put on my red shelf, so I have to kind of ignore that. So, as I said, we are going to talk about the books that Goodreads thinks are the best books that I have ever read. And I have watched some other people doing this video, Grace from GK Reads and EKG as well, Ebony. I've watched their videos, and I can't remember any others, but I have watched some. And one thing that I noticed is that non-fiction comes up a lot. I suppose because you're not necessarily looking for the same things in non-fiction, so maybe people aren't that bothered by the style of writing as long as it teaches them something that they didn't know before, and also you're not going to get annoyed by characters, which I know is a thing that Goodreads readers really don't like, and they dislike characters, which is obviously not going to happen in non-fiction. So I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to also, the other caveat is that I'm going to be ignoring things like Harry Potter, or I don't even know if Hunger Games would be on here, but things like that I'm going to ignore because those are unnecessary to talk about, I think. So let's begin. So the first one here is a non-fiction, as I said, and is The War on Women by Sue Lloyd Roberts. And this is about, Sue Lloyd Roberts is a journalist, and this is about her experience travelling the world and witnessing the worst atrocities inflicted on women. The gender pay gap to gender discrimination in Saudi Arabia, FGM across numerous African countries, and the one that I really remember as sticking with me was the sex trafficking that happened during the Balkan War and after the Balkan War, and that was really harrowing to read. I read this years ago now, so my memory of it is not the best, but I did think it was a really good book. I've rated it 4 stars here on Goodreads. I don't know if I would still feel like, I don't know how intersectional it is, how questioning it is of like power structures and things. So because I haven't read it in a long time, I read it a long time ago, so I don't know if my views would change were I to read it now, but I do remember it being a very difficult read. I remember that the last chapter was written after Sue Lloyd Roberts died by her daughter, and I felt that that was a little more what Sue Lloyd Roberts had done was remove herself from the story, and she was telling the story of the women that she'd interviewed in various different parts of the world, whereas this last chapter was very much about Sue Lloyd Roberts and her daughter and their experience of the gender pay gap. I think that was what that was about. So yeah, I remember liking it, and I think, as I said, because it's a book that's harrowing, that's difficult, that's dealing with difficult topics, and that is talking about something that people would be interested in. It's definitely one that taught me stuff I didn't know about the Balkan War exam, for example. So yeah, I think that's probably why it's come up on top. And next is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Yeah, so this is another non-fiction and another really, really popular non-fiction. As it says in the subtitle, it is about Indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge and the way that those two things can be brought together in order to have a better understanding of the world. Particularly, Robin Wall Kimmerer is a botanist, so a lot of it is about plants and their natures and the things that they can do, and also it's related to climate change, and there's a lot about climate change and how it has changed the ecology of the world, particularly in North America. And so she talks about the way that science has been finding things out that Indigenous people already knew, but they didn't have the scientific method to be trusted when they explained these things. And it's more, so parts of it are about like a connection with nature and a different understanding of the world and our place in it than is typical in the West. And then there are parts that are like, there's chapters that's about her cleaning a pond and about the ways that she has to work with nature and learn to understand nature. And there are parts about like the pollution of a particular lake, which was really of spiritual significance to the First Nations people who lived near that lake, but was completely destroyed, and the ways that that has affected the nature, and also the ways there is some hope in this book as well about things that can be changed. So yeah, it's a really beautifully written book. And I do agree it's a very good one. I think one of the reasons it's so high is it's really accessible for a book about climate change. Like, I've read Naomi Klein as well, who I also love and think is an excellent writer, but I think her style of writing wouldn't be as accessible to as many people. There is beauty and hope, as I said, in Robin Weld Kimmerer, which Naomi Klein doesn't always give you the most hope for humanity, and it's also more focused on like the economics of everything. But yeah, I really like this book. I think it's a great book, and I can understand why it ended up so high up. And then the third one is another non-fiction, one that was on my best books of last year, so definitely I enjoyed it, and that was Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. And this is about the Sackler family, who were it was kind of unknown what they did, but their name was in a lot of museums and art galleries as sponsors and philanthropists in relation to that. And then it was kind of brought out that they were the people behind OxyContin, and how their illegal practices, their unsavoury practices in regards to setting up medical journals in order to back up their drugs and things, how those had been going on, and their advertising practices in relation to drugs as well, and how they had made money off the suffering of millions of people. And it's a really interesting, well-written book, one that is hugely long but very gripping for the story that it tells, which I don't think every writer would have been able to do. But this one is. It's really gripping and really like compelling, makes you want to keep reading it. It starts off as kind of like a middle-class, like lower middle-class Jewish boys pulling themselves up by the bootstraps to get to a certain level in society, and they're kind of interesting characters. The way that he draws their characters, they're like not exactly likeable but not exactly unlikable either, kind of anti-heroes. And then we move on to their children, and they're just like terrible people, but it goes into like a courtroom drama and all sorts, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done, so I can understand why it's up here. It won the Bally Gifford Prize last year, it's I mean, so far 3 for 3 is non-fiction, and yeah, I enjoyed that one. Okay, number 4 is the first one that I didn't love, and this is The Roles We Play by Sabba, which recently won the Jalak Prize. And this is graphic non-fiction about Sabba Khan's experience growing up as the daughter of Pakistani immigrants in London, and her relationship with her family, particularly her mother, and her relationship with her culture and with her religion, and like exploring her relation to her religion and to her culture through graphic memoir. And I think that for me personally, I'm just not a graphic novel kind of person. Like, I haven't found one yet that I've loved. I haven't read that much, so it could be that it's not that I've just picked ones that I didn't love, but I felt like this was written by someone who is an artist and the words were secondary, and for me, I don't want the writing to be secondary. I want the writing to be primary, because it felt like awkward and clunky in places. I thought that the ideas it was describing were good, but the metaphors that really brought me out of it. Also the art style, like, it was nice, but it wasn't my preference for art style either. I just didn't love it. I think it's easy to read and it deals with interesting topics, so I guess that's why. I don't know how many. It's had 167 ratings, yeah, compared to Braiding Sweetgrass, which has had 61,000 ratings. So it's not a hugely well read one. Like, not a lot of people have read and reviewed it on Goodreads, so that's interesting. So that's kind of part, I guess, why it's got such a high rating as well, because there's not as many people giving it those 3 stars, because not as many people are reviewing it. Yeah, but like I said, I think it was fine. It just wasn't really for me, and I definitely wouldn't put it at the 4th best book that I've ever read. Then we have another non-fiction, Disability, Visability, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century, Unabridged Selections, edited by Alice Wong. So this is an anthology of different disabled writers writing about their own experience with their disability, various different disabilities from, I think ME is in here, and so there's definitely one from a blind person, from someone who is deaf and in prison, which I found a really interesting read. Like, he was illiterate, and so it was kind of an oral history that he had told to someone else, but his story of what it was like being deaf in prison was a difficult and really eye-opening read, because I had not considered disability in prison, which is obviously my own ignorance, but it was, yeah, I think more people are more likely, it's more common to be disabled in prison than the general population. So yeah, I think that some of these stories are really, or stories, essays, some writings I really loved, and I wrote down those writers' names in order to read them elsewhere, other of their writing. But like with all anthologies, I didn't love all of them, and I found that like some of them I didn't get on with, which is why for me a anthology probably would never get that high a rating as it has done here. This has got 4.52 on Goodreads, but for me it wouldn't get up that high. Next we have Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow, which is the third in the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend, and this is my favourite middle grade series. I don't read that many middle grade books, so I guess it's hard to it's easy to be my favourite, but yeah, I really loved it, and Hollowpox is my favourite of the three that have come out so far. These are the stories of Morrigan Crow, who in the beginning is 11 years old. She's a cursed child destined to die on her 11th birthday, and instead gets whisked away to this other world where there is a society, where there is a society for people who have a knack, which is like a special talent. So it could be for pickpocketing and playing the violin, or riding dragons, or convincing people to do things through your voice. So some of these are more magical, some of them are more like mundane, they call them. And this is the third one, but I can't tell you any of the plot of that without ruining it. But yeah, they have a lot of whimsy, they have really wonderful descriptions. Yeah, I think it's really immersive in the way that you want a middle grade fiction to be. It has that lightness to it, but what I particularly liked about the third one was that it started to question the world that we've been brought into, and it started to sort of make you think about who we accept as being the good guys and who are the bad guys, and how has this world been set up in a way that could be contributing to some of the issues that are happening. I thought it was really interesting and well done, really, and I've loved all of them, and I think the fourth one's coming out later this year. Number 7 is Sister Outsider, Essays and Speeches by Audre Lorde, and again the sixth non-fiction out of 7, but this is one of my favourite non-fiction books that I have ever read. I absolutely love Lorde's writing. This is about Audre Lorde, as you probably know, is a black lesbian feminist from the 1970s and 80s. This writing is from between 1976 and 1984. She was a professor. Empowerment among minority writers and necessary to expiate the concept of difference according to sex, race and economic status. And it's really, I love her writing. I think it's so accessible for what it is, but also beautiful, and she really is not afraid to go to places where she doesn't have answers, which I really particularly enjoy when I'm reading non-fiction. One that she wrote as a letter to a white feminist, which was really interesting to see how things have so little changed from the 80s to now. And then the first section of this is her diary from when she was travelling around the Soviet Union, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I didn't know to expect that going into this, but I really enjoyed that diary. And yeah, I've just really liked her perspective, I like her style of writing, and I think it's one of the best feminist texts that I personally have ever read. I would 100% recommend that anyone who hasn't read Lorde does, and it's a good one to start with. Like I said, I think it's fairly accessible. Then number 8 here is my first adult novel, and that is The Betrayed by Riene, Archache, Melvin, which has got 4.51 stars here on Goodreads. I read this last month and it was in my top 10 books of the year so far, so I definitely loved it. It's only had 43 ratings, so it's another one that's a little lesser known, and that's potentially why it's got so high up. I don't know if I'd say it was in the top 10 books that I've ever read, where I think Empire of Pain and Sister Outsider so far are the only ones I would actually put in the top 10 ever. But I absolutely loved The Betrayed. I thought it was really wonderful. It is about two sisters who are from the Philippines, and their father was involved in the resistance against the Marcos regime. And so they moved to San Francisco, but he is assassinated. And then after Ferdinand Marcos leaves power, they go back to the Philippines. But one of the sisters has married Marcos's godson. And so he is kind of running for politics in the new regime, but we see the ways that the new regime and the old regime are very similar. It's a haunted story full of ghosts, and we travel around the Philippines from Manila to various southern islands. We see the relationships between these sisters and their mother, the tense relation, and their mother, and then one of the one sister's mother-in-law, and we see from the perspective of each of the sisters and the husband. And it's just so really a dark, sticky book that you can really feel the texture of the place that you're in and of the time period. It felt really evocative and really kind of dark. It deals with a lot of violence because there are 6 coup attempts against the new regime, which is replacing a dictatorship by being a dictatorship. So it's there's a lot of politics involved in the book, but also the conception of the self when you're living under such a political time of political upheaval. I think it's a very slow moving book where not a lot happens, very much focused on these characters and their situation, but so beautifully written, so wonderfully written, and really evocative, like I was saying. So yeah, it became one of my favourite books of the year. I don't know, as I said, if it would be top 10 ever, but definitely one of my favourites of this year. Then we have Wondersmith, which is, I've already talked about that. Aha, number 9. Number 9, we're going to talk about one that is controversial. You know, me not loving, what one did I not love? The Roles We Play, I don't think is that controversial because hardly anyone's read it. But this one is one that has 1.2 million reviews here. And that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn and Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I think is not very good. I think it's a not very good book. If you don't know, it's about Evelyn Hugo, who is this actress. She's a Latina woman in the 1940s, and she goes to Hollywood and she becomes an actress, like Rita Hayworth. So she's white passing and she becomes an actress. And we see her life and her experience getting married to these 7 different men and the love of her life and the relation to that. And it has also got dual timelines, which is not my favourite thing anyway, because I always feel like one of the timelines is superfluous and unnecessary. Like, you really need to earn that second timeline for me, because I feel like most of the time it's a waste. And this book, it's a complete nonsense. Like, the setup of it, of this character in the modern day who is interviewing Evelyn Hugo, who's finally going to like tell her life story, and it seems entirely pointless. It's just to like interject a modern sort of morality onto this tale of an older time, and to really drive home points, to really be like, this is shocking, you should be shocked by this. And I find it just absolutely ridiculous. The writing, I have read 2 Taylor Jenkins Reid books now, and I don't enjoy her style of writing. I find it reads like a gossip novel. I find it reads like a gossip column, and I don't think it's particularly compelling or interesting, and I think her characters are a little over the top and aren't very grounded. They don't feel real to me in any way, and yeah, I just think it's kind of a trashy book. And I have nothing against, I think there's a time and a place for trashy books, but I don't think I would put them in my top 10. And the final one on here is a poetry collection, which is Black Movie by Danez Smith. And I read this 2 years ago now, and I always have trouble talking about poetry collections when it's been a while since I read them. Danez Smith is a very well-known poet. Particularly on BookTube. Most recent collection, Homie, the collection Don't Call Us Dead, I've heard lots of people reviewing and talking about. I haven't read either of those, but Black Movie is, I think, a shorter collection. It's definitely an older collection than those 2, and I really enjoyed it. Way of playing with words was really interesting. There was the one that really sticks out for me is about this little black boy who's on a bus and he's playing with a dinosaur, and Danez turns this into a poem about black movies and about what it would be like to have a black Jurassic Park or various other like cornerstones of American popular culture, what it would be like if that had more blackness, and what it would be like to grow up as a little black boy in America, growing up with the cultural touchstones being reflective of you and your experience and the experience of your family as well. It was a lot about love and about death and people being who Danez had lost as well, who they've lost in their life. And I remember finding it really touching, and also thinking that the way that they work with words is really clever. So I really enjoyed that. But those are the 10 books that Goodreads thinks are the best that I have ever read. And like I was saying, I think that probably Sister Outsider and Empire of Pain are my 2 favourites out of those. Sister Outsider is my number 1. But I really, really also enjoyed The Betrayed. 6 non-fiction, 1 poetry collection, and 3 novels. And I would say that Hollowpox is probably my favourite middle grade novel of all time, so it being up here makes sense. And so let's see, the Emperor of Pain, Braiding Sweetgrass, Hollowpox, Sister Outsider, The Betrayed, and Black Movie. 6 of them I loved. 6 of them I really enjoyed. Only 1 of them I would say was in my top 10 of all time, but 6 of them I did really enjoy. 1 of them, graphic novel, not my thing anyway, so I'll just say that. 1 of them a anthology, which for me is always, because I'm never going to be able to give it a good mark because I'd need all of them to be great for that to happen. And 1 of them that I really just think is a terrible book. Well, not a terrible book, but I think is a bad book, and I don't get the hype of at all. But there you have it, my Goodreads' favourite books that I have ever read. Very interesting selection, I think. I don't think it is every book I've ever read. I'm just feeling now that there are lots of books that I have read when I was younger that are not on here as I have read, as me having had read them. I don't know, that sentence really got away from me. But please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books that I'm talking about, if you enjoyed them. I would love to hear what you have to say, and if you agree with me about any of them being overrated. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, and so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.